everybody. Hear me okay? Good afternoon. So I'm going to do something I've never done before, which is I'm going to do this talk in 10 minutes. So like was just mentioned, I just started a few months ago as a CEO of XPRIZE Foundation. I've been working with XPRIZE for a few years, but in my previous life, I had worked at Deloitte Consulting. I was a partner there, one of the largest management technology consulting firms in the world, where I led the practice focused on disruptive innovation. And as part of that role, I would take CEOs of Fortune 100 companies, particularly in the last few years, typically bring them out to NASA, to Singularity University. In XPRIZE, Singularity University, and Deloitte, we would actually take these groups of CEOs and board member level executives of the largest companies in the world across all industries through this notion of disruption and what technology is going to do to their industry and what innovation would do. And we would discuss the principle of disrupt yourself before you get disrupted. I've recoined that, Uber yourself before you get Kodak. People tend to know what that means. The notion of disruptive advantage versus competitive advantage. If you're a large business right now, an entrepreneur could actually create not just competitive advantage, but disruptive advantage to you and your industry, and you should do that to yourself before it's done to you. And you can actually think in terms of exponentials, not just 10%, but actually 10 times better in terms of where you can go with your model. The other thing that I spent a lot of time doing was I travel the world and visit and study ecosystems from Tel Aviv to New York, Silicon Valley, Santiago, Chile, Berlin, all this ecosystems around the world where there's this entrepreneurial renaissance going on. And I'm surprised how little visibility the rest of the world has, even corporate executives of the biggest company in the world, have to all this entrepreneurialism that's happening through this democratization of technology that is putting innovation that only big governments and big businesses had into the pockets of the average day entrepreneur. And it's a real groundswell effect that's having a major impact. So one of the things that I would share with my executive clients in kind of the for-profit world was how to take advantage of this, how to exploit it. And a lot of that had to go with rewiring yourself from a linear thinker to an exponential thinker. And we're all familiar with the linear trend versus an exponential trend. I'm going to show you a graphic that actually changed my life. And it was a lot of the motivation of why I got out of the for-profit business into nonprofit. Instead of thinking about how this can be used to exploit for-profit initiatives, the notion of how you can use exponentials to actually take on the biggest grand challenges of the world. Let me just describe what you're looking at here. This is a graph by Ray Kurzweil, who's the co-founder of Singularity University, along with Peter Diamandis, who's the executive chairman. He's also the founder and executive chairman of the XPRIZE Foundation. This university, which is up at NASA in Ray Kurzweil's work, this is 100 years of computing power that's plotted here. Every dot you see represents the calculations per second that $1,000 of computing power buys you. This is not a forecast. This is looking at historical data. This is empirical data. This is fact. And very simple graphic, but think about the implications. This is an exponential curve. That green line you see is the same as the other line. The reason why I'm leaving that green line is it's exponential. It's doubling. But notice that the vertical axis is a log scale. So when you take an exponential and you put it on a log scale, what happens? It normalizes it to be a straight line. So it really should be that dotted line, right? The reason I highlight this is an exponential. The reason the graphics that Ray Kurzweil plotted are actually trending upwards means that the exponential effect is actually a more than doubling pattern. This is 100 years of computing power showing that it's been more than doubling for 100 years. From electromechanical computers to relay to vacuum tube to transistors to integrated circuit, the Intel chip. This is significant. Notice that you don't see World War I or the Great Depression or 9/11 or any world events that took this trajectory off its path. Computing power, calculations per second that $1,000 buys you, will continue to do more than a doubling pattern. It's Moore's law, essentially. Think about the implications of exponential versus linear. Okay, we are in human history today in the year 2016 are hitting the knee in the curve. The knee in the curve. We're not wired to understand the implications of an exponential effect. So instead of years, instead of looking at the next 30 years, let's put this in terms of physical distance. If I asked all of you to take 30 linear steps, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, linear steps, 30 meters. Every single one of us is wired to think linear. Intuitively, you would know that I would be up at the exit sign there if I took 30 linear steps. And even more important, we're all wired to really understand, it comes as kind of common sense, where I would be halfway. When am I halfway between here and 30? I'm 15 steps, right in the middle. If I flip that and say, well, what if I took exponential steps? 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32. I just did that doubling pattern 30 times. Where do you think I would be physically? Clearly, I'd be further away than the door, right? Would I be back in California? I'd actually would be 26 times around the planet Earth. I would have gone 1 billion meters. So think about this. Computing power is doubling. It's deceptive. It looks flat, and then it hits the knee in the curve. In 2016, we are hitting the knee in the curve. So anything that becomes digital becomes an exponential. And that's why you see fields like biology merging with biotech becomes an exponential. That's why you see autonomous driving vehicles. That technology is merging with the exponential technology of computing power. 3D printing has been around for 35 years. The reason you're hearing about it now is because cost is coming down, power is going up, quality is going up. It's fitting in your pocket. It's being democratized. You can take that to human genome sequencing. $2 billion in 2007 to sequence a human genome. Craig Venter, he's on the board of XPRIZE. Now you can go do it for under $1,000. All of this is converging, and it's all exponential. The thing is, it's deceptive. Where am I when I'm halfway in an exponential trend? In the linear trend, it was 15 out of 30. In an exponential trend, when am I halfway? In 30 doublings, it's the 29th step, and then it doubles to the 30th. So I'm 50% on the 29th step. We are on the 29th step right now with computing power. You're going to see things happen in the next few years that took 30, 40, 50 years to complete in our linear minds. The year after that, it's going to be 60 years of progress. The year after that, it's going to be 120 years of progress. We're at that point in time, and you have to start paying attention and figure out what is your strategy with these exponentials. Once it becomes digital, becomes exponential, these are the things that you need to be focused on. CEOs of big businesses are learning this. The entrepreneurs are learning this. The Ubers and the Airbnbs of the world are learning this. Why aren't social impact organizations learning this? Why isn't government and politics learning this? Artificial intelligence. AI is on the exponential curve. Siri today, you get frustrated because you ask it a question, it barely can interpret it. Think about what Siri will be when this thing doubles in the next 30 years, 1 billion times more. 30 years, 1 billion times more powerful. AI is on a trajectory to be calculations per second of the human brain by the year 2030. Ray Kurzweil currently runs AI for Google, so he has access to all the resources and the money in the world to actually take some of these inventions and innovations forward. You have advanced robotics, virtual and augmented reality. If I'm on stage here next year, you'll hear a lot about VR and AR. It's going to be transformative to society like the television was transformative to society when we invented TV. 3D printing, networks and sensors called the Internet of Things, nanotechnology, environmental, synthetic biology, digital medicine. You also have organization process innovations like prize-based competitions, the sharing economy, the maker movement, gamification, incentive competition, the blockchain. How many of you know what the blockchain is? Right? The blockchain is a technology that's going to revolutionize and turn the Internet of communication into the Internet of trust. So I don't need a third party between me when I want to do something of a transaction that requires a trust protocol, like voting. Right? So we have a lot of transformations, and we have all the convergence of this technology. And once it becomes exponential, it becomes democratized and disruptive. And then you have an army of entrepreneurs walking around with supercomputers in their pockets that only big government or big business had just a decade or two ago. So I started to recognize this. I'm out there, literally have front row seats to the largest companies in the world, helping them strategize and helping them implement strategies around these technologies and around these exponentials. And it's completely transforming their businesses. Right? I help startups create new industries. So you've got cloud computing, the democratization of technology, and you have all of us are getting wired to do social collaboration, social networking, which means we can team with each other on other parts of the planet. This is a perfect storm scenario that's happening. You have to put a kicker on it, which is in the next few years, you're going to see a dramatic exponential effect in terms of those people that are connected to the internet. In the year 2016, we've got about 3 billion people on the planet that have connection to the internet. 3 billion out of a planet of 7 billion plus. By 2020, just organically, we will put 3 billion more people online. And you've all heard, I'm sure, of Astro Teller and the work he does at Google X, called X. The Google Loon Project, which is putting balloons in the atmosphere. He's already done this for the country of Sri Lanka. If he doesn't do it, Mark Zuckerberg will do it with the Facebook Drone Project, or Richard Branson or Elon Musk or all the other projects. The fact is, within the next 5 to 10 years, we should have a planet completely Wi-Fi enabled at much higher megabytes per second than what we see today, and it's free for the world within a decade. The world changes when that happens. And remember, 10 years from now, within the decade, means that this has doubled 10 times. So what happens when you have a planet full of people connected to the internet with supercomputers in their pockets? And that's what led me to think about this scenario and how it's taking place, right? Grand challenges are out there. We've got problems the world's facing. We're in no shortage of grand challenges. You add on to that exponential technologies, which is the new normal. I just described that. 7 billion plus entrepreneurs with supercomputers in their pocket. What does that formula get you? What kind of world are we going to be in the next 10 years, let alone the next 20, 30 years? It's a world full of problem solvers. So rather than us figuring out how to use this technology to have a good multi-billion-dollar exit, why don't we put that focus and that responsibility in to figure out how to use these technologies in this perfect storm scenario to actually help do some world-changing social impact work? And that's a reality. So I literally was so adamant that this is an opportunity. I resigned as a partner from a major firm, usually a lifelong position, and I got into the XPRIZE world because my notion is this. There's one way to get to all those problem solvers, and it's not by hiring them into government institution, it's not by hiring them into academia and teaching, it's by saying to them, go out and do your day jobs, but in your excess capacity and your nights and weekends, you're a crowd of geniuses with supercomputers in your pockets globally. I want to tap into that. Here's a prize. I'm going to gamify innovation, dress it up like a competition, and design this instrument to put out to the crowd that says, if you can solve this, and I don't care about your background, your age, your demographic, your resume, if you can solve this, you win. And I'm adamant that some of the biggest problems in the world are only going to be solved through crowdsourcing the wisdom of the world, the genius of the crowd. And where XPRIZE plays is when the government is incapable or deemed incapable or doesn't have the trust to solve problems, and when big business doesn't have the profit motive to solve a problem, but that problem has to be solved, who's going to solve it? We're going to collectively solve it. XPRIZE is an instrument that's put out to all of us to gamify the innovation that we all plan to make it a competition to where that needle in the haystack, one of you out there, all these shots on goal, one of you come to the XPRIZE as a winner. And it ignites instant rapid experimentation from a variety of lenses. One example, the first example of the XPRIZE, and I'll conclude on this, was the Ansari XPRIZE, which led to the launch of the space industry. If you go to the Science and Space Museum in the area here, you'll see the winning Spaceship One, which is actually hanging in the institute there, the Smithsonian. This was a $10 million prize for anyone that could put up a spaceship 100 kilometers and back down safely twice to make it reusable. And the competition was offered $10 million. For all the teams that competed collectively, they spent $100 million collectively to win the $10 million prize. By design, it was meant to launch all the R&D. And of course, there was a winner that then sparked a new industry, and that's XPRIZE's model. What I conclude with is just to say, and this is the notion of engagement, you have to have ownership for yourself to get engaged. Don't wait for someone to engage you. Take the initiative to go get yourself engaged. If you have the intellectual property to change big businesses, to do better, you have a responsibility to take that intellectual property and apply it to social impact. And it's kind of a life choice, and I hope all of you follow that as well. Thank you.